Take the exact same photo of your face, show it to 100 strangers alone, then show a second group of 100 strangers the same photo, except this time you're standing next to 3 other people. The second group will rate you as more attractive. Not slightly, measurably, consistently, across a real published study. Nobody touched your face. Nothing about you changed. The only difference was who was standing next to you in the frame. This is the cheerleader effect, and the science behind it is stranger than the joke it started as. The term itself didn't come from a psychology lab, it came from a sitcom. In 2008, the show How I Met Your Mother aired an episode where the character Barney Stinson lays out a theory. He claims that individual women, who look average on their own, appear far more attractive when standing in a group, because your brain doesn't process them individually, it processes the group as a blurred, flattering whole, and averages out anyone's individual flaws. He calls it the cheerleader effect. It was a joke, delivered by a fictional womanizer on a network sitcom, the kind of thing you'd assume was made up for a punchline and forgotten by the next commercial break. Except scientists actually heard it, got curious, and decided to test whether it was true. In 2013, 2 vision scientists at UC San Diego, Drew Walker and Edward Vul, designed an experiment to find out. They gathered a large set of individual face photos, ordinary people, no models, no professional photography. Then they digitally arranged some of those same faces into group photos of 3 people standing side by side. They showed participants a mix of solo photos and group photos and asked them to rate the attractiveness of specific individuals in each one. Crucially, the exact same face appeared in both conditions, sometimes alone, sometimes grouped with 2 other faces. If attractiveness was a fixed, objective quality sitting entirely in someone's bone structure, the ratings should have come out identical either way. They didn't. Across multiple trials, faces embedded in a group were rated as more attractive than the same faces shown alone. Walker and Vul published the results in the journal Psychological Science under the title "Hierarchical Encoding Makes Individuals in a Group Seem More Attractive Than Individuals Viewed Alone." A sitcom joke had just become a peer-reviewed finding. Here's where it gets genuinely interesting, because the explanation has almost nothing to do with comparison, and almost everything to do with how your visual system is built to process large amounts of information quickly. When your brain looks at a single face, it processes fine, individual detail. Every asymmetry, every blemish, every slightly uneven feature gets registered with full resolution, because there's nothing else competing for that visual attention. But when your brain looks at a group of faces at the same time, it doesn't have the processing bandwidth to analyze each face at that same level of individual detail instantly. So it does something remarkably efficient instead. It computes what researchers call an ensemble representation, a fast, automatic average of the whole group, and then stores each individual face as a small deviation from that average, rather than as a fully separate, fully detailed image. This is called hierarchical encoding, and it happens below conscious awareness, in a fraction of a second. Here's why that matters for attractiveness specifically. Decades of separate research, going back to the 1990s, has established something psychologists call the averageness effect. When you take many individual faces and digitally morph them together into a single composite average face, people consistently rate that average face as more attractive than most of the individual faces that went into it. This isn't about the average face being bland or boring, it's about symmetry and predictability. Averaging tends to smooth out unusual proportions, minor asymmetries, and small irregularities, the very features that make an individual face uniquely imperfect. Your brain has evolutionary reasons to read that kind of average symmetry as healthy and attractive. It's one of the oldest and most replicated findings in the psychology of attraction. So put these 2 things together. When you see a group of faces, your brain automatically generates something close to an averaged version of that group. Then, when it goes back to evaluate one specific face within the group, that individual face gets perceptually pulled toward the more symmetrical, more flattering group average, the way a single data point gets pulled toward the mean. Your own asymmetries and blemishes get partially diluted by the visual average your brain already built without asking you. You're not getting rated more attractive because you look better next to your friends by comparison. You're getting rated more attractive because your brain's visual system is quietly editing your face toward its own idea of the average, and averages, statistically, tend to look good. If your brain is enjoying this one, this is a good moment to like the video. It actually helps way more than people realize. Now here's the detail that really separates this from Barney Stinson's original joke, and makes the real science more interesting than the sitcom version. Walker and Vul specifically tested whether this effect depended on being surrounded by less attractive people, the classic ugly friend strategy. It doesn't. The effect showed up even when the other faces in the group were rated as equally or more attractive than the individual being judged. This isn't a contrast trick, where you look better because everyone around you looks worse. It's a raw perceptual averaging process that happens regardless of who else is in the frame, which means the entire cultural idea of intentionally surrounding yourself with less attractive friends to look better by comparison is not just unnecessary, it actually misses how the effect works. You don't need worse-looking company, you just need company, any company. This connects to a much broader area of vision science called ensemble perception, studied extensively by researchers like George Alvarez at Harvard. Human vision is startlingly good at extracting statistical summaries from groups almost instantly. The average facial expression of a crowd, the average size of a set of circles, the average direction a group of people is looking. You can glance at a crowd for a fraction of a second and accurately estimate whether the crowd looks generally happy or generally tense, without being able to name a single individual face you saw. This is not a flaw in your visual system, it's an efficiency feature. Full detailed processing of every face in a group would be enormously expensive for your brain, so instead it builds a fast summary and fills in individual detail more sparsely on an as-needed basis. The cheerleader effect is essentially a byproduct of one of the most useful shortcuts your visual system has ever developed. Once you know this, you start noticing where it's already been deployed, often by people who never read the paper but figured out the effect intuitively. Dating apps are a perfect example. Profile advice consistently tells people to lead with a solo photo and use group photos sparingly, and there's real logic to that in terms of clarity of who you actually are, but plenty of people still get their highest engagement on a well-composed group shot without understanding why. Sports teams, boy bands, cheerleading squads themselves, wedding parties, red carpet lineups. None of this is accidental. Group promotional photography has leaned on this instinctively for decades, long before there was a controlled study explaining the mechanism. Photographers and stylists talk about a group photo just looking better, without necessarily knowing they're describing hierarchical encoding and the averageness effect. They found the effect empirically, through trial and error, the same way Barney Stinson stumbled onto it as a joke, decades before the lab caught up. There's also a slightly humbling twist buried in all of this, if you think about it for more than a few seconds. The version of your face that gets rated as most attractive isn't the one that's most uniquely, individually you. It's the version that's been perceptually smoothed toward an average, the version where your specific quirks and asymmetries have been partially diluted by the faces around you. The cheerleader effect is, in a strange way, evidence that human attraction is drawn less to individual uniqueness and more to statistical familiarity, to faces that read as safe, predictable, symmetrical, unremarkable in the most literal sense of that word. What gets flattered by the group isn't your most distinctive self, it's the most average version your brain can extract from the crowd you happen to be standing in. And maybe that's the most interesting part of this whole finding. We tend to think of attraction as something deeply individual, a reaction to a specific, particular person. But so much of it is actually happening at the level of fast, automatic, statistical processing your brain runs before you've even consciously registered a face. You're not falling for a person's unique details nearly as often as you think. You're falling for how well their face lines up with an average your brain built in a fraction of a second, sometimes built out of the very group of strangers standing next to them in the photo. The cheerleader effect isn't really about cheerleaders, or friend groups, or dating strategy. It's a small, strange window into how much of what you call attraction is actually just math, running silently, underneath something that feels completely instinctive.